The rain hammered against the windows of the penthouse office overlooking the city skyline. Damien Cross stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the blurred lights below without really seeing them. His reflection in the glass showed a man carved from marble, all sharp angles and calculated composure. At 34, he had built an empire from algorithms and ambition, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to feel anything that did not involve profit margins or quarterly reports. His assistant knocked twice before entering, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She placed a slim folder on his desk without a word, then retreated just as quickly. Damien knew what it contained before he even opened it. His mother had been relentless lately, and this was her latest attempt to crack through the fortress he had built around himself. Victoria Cross was dying. Kidney disease had ravaged her once vibrant body, leaving her frail and confined to a wellness center where volunteers rotated through with forced smiles and gentle hands. She had exactly one wish left, to see her son connect with another human being before she left this world. Not a business partner, not a socialite looking for status, but someone real. That evening, Damien found himself standing outside Bellissimo, an upscale Italian restaurant tucked away in the historic district. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, creating halos around the streetlights. He checked his watch for the third time, already planning his exit strategy. 20 minutes of polite conversation, a fabricated emergency call from his office, and he would be free. He would tell his mother he tried, and that would be enough. At T7:15, a woman approached from down the street. She carried a plain black umbrella and wore a coat that had seen better seasons. Her hair, light brown with hints of gold, fell loosely around her shoulders, slightly damp despite her efforts. She was not what he expected. There was no designer handbag, no practiced walk designed to attract attention, no calculating assessment of his worth in her eyes. She simply looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere genuine. Nora Bennett introduced herself with a firm handshake, her palm warm against his cold one. They settled into a corner table, and Damien immediately felt the discomfort of being truly seen rather than simply observed. She did not ask about his company or his net worth. Instead, she told him about her work at a social services agency, about the families she helped navigate impossible situations, about the kids who slipped through systemic cracks despite everyone's best efforts. Her voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet determination that unsettled him. She spoke about a teenager named Marcus who had aged out of foster care with nothing but a trash bag of belongings and big dreams. She talked about an elderly woman who chose between medication and meals every month. These were not abstractions to her. They were people, real and important, and she treated them as such. When their meals arrived, Nora picked at her pasta absently, more focused on answering Damien's cautious questions than eating. She described her philosophy simply: everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, to matter. It sounded naive to his ears, impossibly idealistic in a world that rewarded ruthlessness and punished softness. Yet she said it with such conviction that he found himself almost believing her. Then something happened that Damien would replay in his mind for weeks afterward. As the waiter cleared their plates, Nora quietly asked for a container. She carefully transferred her nearly untouched meal into it, then excused herself. Damien watched through the window as she walked outside into the drizzle, approached a man huddled in a doorway across the street, and knelt beside him. She spoke to him for a moment, handed him the container and a few bills from her purse, then touched his shoulder gently before returning inside. She did not mention it when she sat back down. She did not seek recognition or praise. She simply continued their conversation, as if pausing to share her dinner with the stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Damien stared at her, something uncomfortable shifting in his chest. He had spent years insulating himself from discomfort, from feelings that could not be monetized or controlled. Yet here was this woman, voluntarily opening herself to the world's pain, and responding with action rather than apathy. They talked for another hour. Though Damien could not remember initiating his emergency exit call, he found himself asking about her childhood, her dreams, the moment she decided to dedicate her life to helping others. Nora spoke honestly, without embellishment or self-aggrandizement. She had grown up with enough, she said, and realized early that enough was more than most people had. So she chose to bridge that gap however she could. When they finally stood to leave, Damien offered to drive her home. She hesitated, clearly accustomed to declining help, but the rain had intensified, and she finally nodded. The drive was quiet, comfortable in a way Damien had not experienced before. She did not fill the silence with chatter or try to impress him with witty observations. She simply existed beside him, present and undemanding. He pulled up outside a modest apartment building in a neighborhood that had not yet been gentrified. Nora thanked him sincerely, her hand briefly touching his arm before she stepped out into the rain. Damien sat in his car long after she disappeared inside, staring at the spot where she had stood. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the first crack in a dam that had held back a reservoir for far too long. He drove home slowly, his mind replaying moments from the evening. The way she listened without judgment, the way she gave without expectation, the way she saw humanity in everyone, including him. For the first time in years, Damien Cross felt something other than emptiness. He felt curiosity, and underneath that, the faint stirring of something he had long ago buried. Hope. Damien had not intended to see Nora Bennett again. He told himself the evening had been pleasant, that he had fulfilled his obligation to his mother, and that was the end of it. He threw himself back into work with renewed intensity, as if burying himself in spreadsheets and strategy meetings could erase the memory of her quiet kindness. It did not work. 3 days later, he found himself in the Riverside District, a neighborhood marked for potential redevelopment. His company had been eyeing several properties there, and he wanted to assess the area personally before committing millions to the project. His assistant walked beside him, tablet in hand, rattling off demographics and property values while Damien surveyed the aging buildings with a critical eye. Then he heard laughter, children's laughter, bright and unrestrained, cutting through the urban noise like sunlight through clouds. He turned toward the sound and found himself looking through a chain-link fence into a small courtyard. There, surrounded by at least a dozen children of varying ages, was Nora. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she was crouched down, speaking to a small boy who clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. Damien stopped walking. His assistant continued talking for several seconds before realizing she had lost her audience. She followed his gaze, recognized the scene as unremarkable, and waited with practiced patience for him to refocus. But Damien could not look away. He watched as Nora lifted the boy gently, supporting him as he took hesitant steps with leg braces. The other children cheered, and Nora's face lit up with genuine pride. One of the older children, a girl with dark braids, spotted him standing there. She pointed and shouted something Damien could not hear. Suddenly, every small face turned in his direction. Nora looked up, surprise flickering across her features before settling into something softer. She said something to the children, then walked over to the fence. "Damien," she said, and her voice carried no accusation or question, just simple acknowledgement. "What brings you to this part of town?" Before he could answer, the children swarmed the fence like curious birds, peppering him with questions. What was his name? Did he have any kids? Why was he wearing a suit? Did he want to see their art projects? The barrage was overwhelming and oddly disarming. His assistant looked horrified, but Damien found himself smiling despite his instinct to retreat. Nora laughed at his expression. "They don't see many people in business attire around here," she explained. Then, to his surprise, she unlatched the gate. "Would you like to come in? We're just finishing up outdoor time before snack." Damien glanced at his assistant, who subtly shook her head, but something in him overrode the logical response. He nodded and stepped through the gate into a world entirely foreign to his experience. The courtyard was small, surrounded by a community center that had seen better decades. Chalk drawings covered every inch of concrete. Toys were scattered across the space, and a basketball hoop hung crooked on one wall. The boy with the leg braces, Oliver, as Nora introduced him, approached Damien with fearless curiosity. He was maybe 6 years old, with enormous brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "Are you Miss Nora's boyfriend?" he asked with the bluntness only children possess. Damien felt his face warm, but before he could formulate a response, Nora laughed. "Oliver, that's not a polite question to ask someone you just met." She ruffled his hair affectionately. "This is Mr. Cross. He's visiting our neighborhood today. Can he play basketball with us?" Another child asked, a lanky boy with scraped knees and boundless energy. What followed was perhaps the most surreal hour of Damien's professional life. He found himself sitting on concrete, helping a little girl sort colored blocks. He pushed Oliver on a swing, careful and uncertain at first, then more confidently as the boy squealed with delight. He answered endless questions about his car, his job, whether he knew any superheroes personally. His expensive suit jacket ended up draped over the fence, his tie loosened, his carefully maintained composure completely abandoned. Through it all, Nora moved among the children with practiced ease, settling disputes, wiping tears, celebrating small victories. She noticed when one child sat alone and drew him into the group. She praised effort over outcome, encouraged kindness over competition, and somehow maintained order without ever raising her voice. Damien found himself watching her as much as he watched the children, studying this woman who chose this life when she could have chosen so many easier paths. When a bell rang, signaling the end of outdoor time, the children reluctantly began gathering toys and heading inside. Oliver tugged on Damien's sleeve. "Will you come back?" he asked, his expression so hopeful it made Damien's chest tight. "I don't know," Damien answered honestly, unwilling to make promises he might not keep. After the children filed inside, Nora walked Damien back to the gate. His assistant had long since retreated to wait by the car, probably fielding calls and rescheduling meetings. Nora studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "You're looking at properties in this neighborhood." It was not a question. Damien nodded, unsure how she knew, but not surprised she had figured it out. "We're considering several redevelopment projects." "Redevelopment," Nora repeated, and something in her tone made him defensive. "That usually means displacement. These families, these kids, they're barely holding on as it is. Where will they go when you turn their affordable housing into luxury condos?" Damien felt the familiar walls rising, the protective instinct to justify, to explain market forces and economic realities. But standing there in that shabby courtyard, with chalk dust on his pants, and the echo of children's laughter still in his ears, the justifications felt hollow. "I didn't think about it that way," he admitted. And the honesty surprised even. Nora's expression softened slightly. "Most people don't, but you're here now. You've seen them. You can choose to think about it differently." He paused, then added, "If you really want to help, Damien, don't write a check and walk away. Show up. Be present. Let these kids see that someone from your world thinks they matter." Her words struck him harder than any business rival's criticism ever had. Before he could respond, she turned and walked back inside, leaving him standing alone at the fence. His assistant approached cautiously, tablet extended with the afternoon's itinerary, but Damien waved her off. That evening, instead of returning to his office, he drove to the wellness center where his mother stayed. Victoria was dozing in her chair by the window, blanket tucked around her thin frame. He sat beside her quietly until she stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Damien," she murmured, surprised but pleased. "2 visits in 1 week. Should I be worried?" He took her hand gently. "I saw Nora today, at the community center where she works." Victoria smiled, knowing and gentle. "And what did you think?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint colors across his mother's pale face. "I think I've been living in a very small world," he finally said. "And I'm not sure I know how to live in a bigger one." His mother squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "You start by showing up," she said simply, "just like you did today." Over the following weeks, Damien found himself returning to the community center. At first, he told himself it was research, understanding the neighborhood before making investment decisions. But that excuse were thin as he began recognizing individual children, learning their names, hearing their stories. Oliver always ran to greet him, sharing elaborate tales about his week. A shy girl named Sophia started showing him her drawings. A teenager named James asked him questions about business and college with hunger in his eyes. And Nora, she watched all of this with careful neutrality, neither encouraging nor discouraging his presence. She treated him the same as any other volunteer, assigning tasks, correcting mistakes, expecting genuine effort. It was humbling and frustrating and strangely addictive. Then came the day everything changed. Damien was helping supervise an outdoor activity when Oliver wandered away from the group, drawn by a stray cat near the parking lot. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Panic rippled through the courtyard as volunteers quickly counted heads and realized someone was missing. Damien moved on instinct, pushing through the gate and scanning the area. He spotted Oliver's bright red jacket near the street, and his heart stopped. The boy was crouched at the curb, oblivious to traffic, reaching for the cat. Damien ran, faster than he had moved in years, reaching Oliver just as a delivery truck rounded the corner. He scooped the boy up, stumbling back onto the sidewalk as the truck rushed past, horn blaring. Oliver clung to him, startled and beginning to cry. Damien held him tight, his own heart hammering, his hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. By the time they made it back to the courtyard, Nora was there, her face white but composed. She took Oliver from his arms gently, checking him over, whispering reassurances. But her eyes, when they met Damien's, held something new. Gratitude, yes, but also a question: reassessment. That night, his mother's condition worsened. Damien received the call at 2 in the morning and arrived at the wellness center to find Victoria struggling to breathe, her body finally surrendering to the disease. The medical staff worked efficiently, making her comfortable, but Damien knew what this meant. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, feeling utterly helpless, despite all his resources and power. Then the door opened softly and Nora slipped inside. She did not ask permission or offer platitudes. She simply pulled a chair to the other side of the bed and took Victoria's other hand. As dawn broke through the window, Nora began to hum. It was a simple melody, something old and familiar, a lullaby perhaps. Her voice was quiet but steady, filling the sterile room with unexpected warmth. Victoria's breathing eased, her face relaxing. She opened her eyes briefly, looked at both of them, and smiled before closing them again. Damien felt something crack open inside him, something he had kept locked away for so long he had forgotten it existed. Tears came, silent and unstoppable, as he watched this woman, who barely knew him, give his mother the gift of peace in her final hours. Victoria passed 3 days later with both of them present, and in that moment, Damien understood what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. Connection was not weakness. Compassion was not inefficiency. Love was not a transaction. It was simply the most human thing in the world. The weeks following Victoria's death blurred together in a haze of grief and unexpected clarity. Damien handled the funeral arrangements with mechanical precision, accepting condolences from business associates who had never met his mother, reading sympathy cards from people who saw his loss as a networking opportunity. Through it all, Nora remained a quiet presence, never intrusive, but always available. She helped sort through Victoria's belongings, sharing stories Damien had never heard, revealing facets of his mother's volunteer work he had never taken the time to understand. One evening, as they packed the last of Victoria's things, Nora found a journal tucked in a drawer. She hesitated, then handed it to Damien. "She would want you to have this." That night, alone in his penthouse, Damien read his mother's words. Page after page chronicled her volunteer work, the people she met, the small victories and heartbreaking defeats. But woven throughout were entries about him, his distance, his isolation, her worry that he had traded his humanity for success. The final entry, written just days before her death, was simple. "I introduced him to Nora. If anyone can remind him who he truly is, it will be her. I can rest now, knowing he has a chance." Damien closed the journal and stared out at the city lights, seeing them differently now. Each light represented lives, stories, struggles, people who existed beyond his carefully controlled world. His mother had spent her final months trying to give him a gift, and he had almost missed it entirely. The next morning, he called an emergency board meeting. His executive team assembled with typical efficiency, expecting a new acquisition strategy or market expansion. Instead, Damien announced he was restructuring the company's priorities. A portion of their profits would be redirected to community development, not the kind that displaced residents for luxury condos, but the kind that strengthened existing neighborhoods. He was establishing the Victoria Cross Foundation, focused on supporting grassroots organizations and the people who ran them. The boardroom erupted in protest. Shareholders would revolt. Competitors would see it as weakness. The market would punish them. Damien listened to every objection, then responded with the calm he had never felt before. My mother spent her life proving that profit and purpose are not mutually exclusive. I intend to honor that legacy. Anyone unwilling to support this direction is welcome to leave. 3 board members resigned immediately. Damien accepted their departures without argument. The remaining team, shocked but intrigued, began asking questions. How would this work operationally? What were the metrics for success? Could purpose-driven business actually be profitable? That was when Damien made his most surprising announcement. He wanted Nora Bennett as the foundation's co-director. She had the experience, the connections, and most importantly, the integrity to ensure their resources went where they would make real impact. His team exchanged glances, uncertain whether to be impressed or concerned that their CEO was making major decisions based on personal relationships. When Damien appeared at the community center that afternoon to propose the idea, Nora's initial response was an immediate refusal. I'm not interested in being anyone's charity case or token good deed, she said flatly. And I'm definitely not interested in being paraded around to make your company look benevolent. That's not what this is, Damien insisted, though he understood her skepticism. I'm not trying to use you. I'm trying to learn from you. You know what these communities need. You know which organizations are making real differences and which ones are just performing for donors. I have resources, but no roadmap. You have the roadmap. Nora studied him for a long moment, searching for the angle, the hidden agenda. But Damien met her gaze steadily, letting her see the truth he was still learning to articulate. He was tired of the person he had been. He wanted to become someone his mother could have been proud of, someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. Co-director, Nora finally said. That means equal say in all decisions. No overruling me because you're the one signing the checks. Equal partners. Damien agreed. Over the following months, they built something neither could have created alone. Nora connected them with organizations that had been operating on shoestring budgets, doing extraordinary work with minimal resources. Damien provided not just funding, but strategic planning, helping them scale their impact without losing their authenticity. Together, they created systems that measured success, not in dollars, but in lives changed. Families supported, children given opportunities they would never have had otherwise. The work was exhausting and exhilarating. They disagreed frequently, their different worldviews clashing over strategy and priorities. But the disagreements felt productive, each challenging the other to think differently, to see beyond their own assumptions. Slowly, without either fully realizing it was happening, their partnership deepened into something more personal. It started small. Damien bringing coffee to their morning meetings, knowing exactly how Nora took hers. Nora remembering when Damien had important presentations, texting encouragement before he went on stage. Shared meals after long days, conversations that drifted from work to life, from strategy to dreams. Hands touching briefly while reviewing documents, eye contact held a moment longer than necessary, smiles that meant more than professional courtesy. The community center became their second home. Damien found himself looking forward to volunteering hours, to the chaos and honesty of children who did not care about his bank account. Oliver had taken to calling him Mr. D and would climb into his lap during story time. Trusting and affectionate in a way that terrified and healed Damien simultaneously. One Saturday afternoon, While helping organize a supply closet, Oliver tugged on Damien's sleeve. "Mr. D, are you going to be my dad?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Damien froze, unsure how to respond. Aware that Nora had stopped moving in the doorway, Oliver continued innocently. "Because Miss Nora said you've been here almost every day, and that's what dads do. They show up." Damien knelt to Oliver's level, his throat tight. "Your dad, that's a pretty important job." "The most important," Oliver agreed. "Seriously, but I think you'd be good at it. You already taught me how to tie my shoes, and you remember my favorite snacks, and you don't get mad when I ask too many questions." From the doorway, Nora's eyes glistened. She had worked so hard to give these children stability, to show them they were worthy of love and commitment. Watching Damien with Oliver, seeing this transformation from cold businessman to present, caring human being, something in her own carefully guarded heart began to shift. On the 6-month anniversary of Victoria's death, Damien organized a dedication ceremony for the Foundation's first major project, a renovated community center in the Riverside neighborhood. He stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of families, volunteers, local officials, and his remaining board members. Nora sat in the front row, Oliver beside her in his best clothes, beaming with pride. "My mother believed that everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, to matter," Damien began, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. "She spent her life proving that belief through action. When she knew her time was limited, she gave me one final gift. She introduced me to someone who would show me what she had been trying to teach me all along." He looked directly at Nora. "She introduced me to a woman who chose purpose over profit, presence over performance, love over luxury. Someone who reminded me that wealth means nothing if you use it to build walls instead of bridges. Someone who has become my partner, my teacher, and my compass when I lose direction." The crowd applauded, but Damien was not finished. He stepped away from the podium and walked to where Nora sat, suddenly aware of hundreds of eyes watching but caring only about one pair. "I came to that blind date expecting nothing. I left questioning everything I thought I knew about success, about purpose, about what makes a life meaningful. You changed me, Nora, not by trying to fix me, but by simply being yourself, and challenging me to become myself." He knelt, reaching into his pocket for the small box he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. This was it. Surrounded by the community they had built together, with Oliver gasping in excitement beside them, Damien opened the box to reveal a simple ring, elegant, but not ostentatious. "I'm not asking you to marry a billionaire or a CEO," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm asking you to marry the man you helped me become. The one who finally understands that the best investment I can make is in love, in community, in showing up every single day for the people who matter. Will you marry me?" Nora's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent. Oliver tugged on her sleeve, whispering loudly, "Say yes, Miss Nora." She laughed through her tears, nodding before she could even find words. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes. Absolutely yes." The community center erupted in cheers as Damien slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. Oliver and a dozen other children immediately swarmed them, hugging legs and squealing with joy. Camera flashes went off, people applauded, and somewhere in the chaos, Damien caught sight of his mother's photograph hanging on the newly dedicated memorial wall. He could almost hear her voice. "Proud and Noe told you so." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, they married in the courtyard of the community center where they had first truly seen each other. No elaborate ceremony, no society page coverage, just the people who had witnessed their journey. Oliver served as ring bearer, taking his role with adorable seriousness. Children from the center sang, slightly off-key, but utterly sincere. James, the teenager who had asked Damien about business, gave a reading about love and commitment that moved everyone to tears. As Damien and Nora exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to show up for each other the way they showed up for their community. The sunset painted gold across the shabby courtyard walls. It was perfect, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. Their honeymoon was spent not on a tropical beach, but expanding the foundations reached to 3 more neighborhoods. Their home became a gathering place for volunteers, foster children, and anyone who needed a safe space. Oliver and 2 other children officially joined their family through adoption, turning their quiet house into joyful chaos. Years later, when people asked Damien about his success story, he no longer talked about market caps or acquisition strategies. He talked about a blind date he almost skipped, about a woman who fed strangers her dinner, about children who taught him what truly mattered. He talked about his mother's final gift, the chance to become fully human again, and Nora, when asked what made their relationship work, would smile and say simply, he chose to show up. And then he kept choosing it, every single day. In the end, that was the real story. Not a fairy tale about a billionaire and a social worker, but a truth about transformation. About how one person's genuine kindness can crack open another person's carefully constructed armor. About how showing up, being present, and choosing love over fear can change everything. Damien had thought that blind date would be his last. In a way, he was right. It was his last as the cold, disconnected man he had been. It became the first of countless days as the man he was meant to be all along. The one his mother always believed existed beneath the surface, just waiting for someone brave enough to call him home.